With these four problems, we are still looking at straight angles or straight lines, which have 180 degrees, but we now have a variable with a coefficient in front. So 15x plus 75 has to equal 180. So we're going to flip 75 over and move it to the other side. Now it's gone from here, and we still have 15x on the left. 180 minus 75 is 105. Then we need to divide both sides by 15. This leaves us with x, and over here we should get 7. Solve the remaining for x. If lines L and M are parallel, then corresponding angles created by L and M cut by transversal T are congruent. Is this statement true or false? If these lines are parallel, are corresponding angles congruent? Yes, that is true. This one says if corresponding angles created by L and M are congruent, then L and M are parallel. This is called the converse. So let's go back. Here this one says if they are parallel, then they are congruent. And this one says if they are congruent, then they must be parallel. So this is the converse of the original statement. And a converse just changes the order of the statement. So the if and the then piece flip places. And we're going to discover in this lesson if the converse is true. We know from the previous lesson that this statement, or from previous lessons, that this statement is true. But the converse is something that we're going to discover. So here are some if-then statements. And our job is to determine whether they are true or false. If today is Tuesday, then tomorrow is Wednesday. That is a true statement. If tomorrow is not Wednesday, then today is not Tuesday. That is also true. If tomorrow is Wednesday, then today is Tuesday. If I am 13 years old, then I am a teenager. That would be correct. If I am not a teenager, then I am not 13 years old. If you're not a teenager, you can't be 13. If I am a teenager, then I am 13. Well, if you're a teenager, you could be 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So is this one true? If you are a teenager, you must be 13? No, that one is false. If I like chocolate ice cream, then I like all flavors of ice cream. Not necessarily. If I do not like all flavors of ice cream, then I do not like chocolate ice cream. Well, chocolate is a flavor, and if you don't like all flavors, then you don't like chocolate? Well, in order to not like all flavors, you just need to dislike one of them. So maybe you don't like strawberry. Then it would be true that you don't like all flavors. But that doesn't mean that you don't like chocolate. That just means you don't like the strawberry. If I like all flavors of ice cream, then I like chocolate ice cream. That one is true. Now, the converse is when we switch the order. So if today is Tuesday, then tomorrow is Wednesday. The converse would be if tomorrow is Wednesday, then today is Tuesday. They switch the order. Here I have, if I am 13 years old, then I am a teenager. If I am a teenager, then I am 13 years old. If I like chocolate ice cream, I like all flavors. And if I like all flavors, then I like chocolate ice cream. So, is it safe to assume that if the statement is true, the converse also has to be true? Well, that was the case here, but not in this one. A was true, but C was false. And in 3, A was false, but C was true. So just switching the order does not guarantee that the converse will be the same as the original statement. So when we go back to that original question, can we assume that if this first one is true, that the converse has to also be true? No. We need to look at it independently. For problems 4 through 6, use the diagrams of line L, M, and T to determine whether the statement is true or false. If L and M are parallel, then alternate interior, so opposite sides of T, and in between L and M, created by L and M cut by transversal T are congruent. That is true. We wrote down some notes of alternate interior angles on page 188 and 189 in your workbook. If L and M are parallel, then alternate exterior, so opposite sides of T, outside of the parallel lines, are congruent. That is also true. If L and M are parallel, then corresponding angles created by L and M are congruent. So corresponding is the same side of T and the same position on the parallel lines. That one is also true. Consider the structure of these two statements. If corresponding angles created by lines L and M cut by a transversal are congruent, then L and M are parallel. That's the converse that we're not sure about yet. Remember, we talked earlier about how knowing the statement is true doesn't guarantee that the converse is true. B says if lines L and M are not parallel, then corresponding angles created by L and M are not congruent. So if they are not parallel, they will not be congruent. Now, if we go back, when we switched the order, so the teenager and the age, but we included that word not, or when we switched the order and we included the word not, these had the same, we call them truth values. They had the same truth values. They were either both true or they were both false in this case. So looking at these statements here, the corresponding angles are congruent, so that went to the end, and then the parallel went to the beginning, but we included these words not. So if this is true, which we don't know yet, then this one has to be true. But if this one is false, this one will also have to be false, just based on the structure of using that word not and swapping the order. So draw intersecting lines L and M with a transversal T. So L and M are not parallel, they are intersecting. So we're going to draw two lines that intersect, and we're going to label them L and M. And we're going to cut them using a transversal labeled T. Instead of assuming that correspondings are not true, we're going to assume that it is false. And we're going to say, well, what if they are the same? What if the corresponding angles are congruent? Then what would happen? Ooh. For example, these two would be corresponding, so we're going to say, well, what if those are congruent? So let's label both of those with an X. If those are X, then to figure out what this angle is over here, this is a 180, So we can just do 180 minus x. But in yesterday's lesson, we saw that the sum of the angles in a triangle have to add up to 180. So we would have this pink angle plus this blue angle plus something else over here. We'll call that one y. And all that has to equal 180. Well, if I subtract x and I add x, those are gone. So I have 180 plus y equals 180. Well, that means that this extra angle over here has to be 0 degrees. Can this angle here be 0 degrees? Well, no, because it's creating an angle. So we can't have a 0 degree angle there. That would just make a straight line. So it's impossible for these two correspondings to be the same. So if they are not congruent, then, and the lines are not parallel, and not congruent, we know that that is a true statement. If it's not parallel, that won't be congruent. Not parallel, not congruent. That's true. And we said these have to have the same truth value. So that means A is also true. So now we know if the lines are parallel, those angles are congruent. And if those angles are congruent, then the lines have to be parallel. For problems 8 through 11, use the diagrams of lines A, C, and D to determine whether lines C and D are parallel. Explain how you know. These two, in problem 8, are considered alternate exterior. They're on the opposite side of the transversal and the outside of the parallel lines. So they are parallel. C and D are parallel because the alternate exterior angles are congruent. Here, this is a straight line. So this one, if we were going to make 180, has to be 100. And then these two are corresponding. So C and D are parallel. Because we have a straight angle and the corresponding angles are congruent. Here for number 10, we know this is 135, so this would be a vertical angle. 45 would go here, but we don't have any information about these down here. So we don't have enough information to tell, in this case, if C and D are parallel because we don't have any angles around line D. So we will say there is not enough information to determine if lines C and D are parallel. All right, here I have 135, so this would be a vertical angle. I have a straight angle here, so I know that 135 plus 45 makes 180. And these are vertical angles. But notice 45 and 44 are not the same. So these are not parallel because the corresponding angles are not congruent. Congruent means they are the same. 44 and 45 are not the same. Please make sure your warm-up is finished when you are solving for x, and your workbook is filled in with the diagrams labeled and all of the information provided.